Hi, everyone. I'm Rosemary Miller here with Stephen Juneau, the U.S. economist for Bank of America Global Research, here to give us a January CPI reaction. Thank you so much for joining me today, Stephen.
Thanks for having me on.
So, Stephen, how do you interpret the reported 0.3% increase in the U.S. Consumer Price Index for January?
So I think at first glance, it was a little hotter than everyone expected. You saw strength kind of across the board, but mainly in services. Core services inflation really accelerated to about 0.7% month over month from 0.4% month over month previously. So our read of the data is that this isn't great news for the Fed. It's not what they want to see. They're hoping to see core services inflation really start to moderate. They want to see disinflation broaden away from just being core goods deflation and show up on the services side of the economy. And so today's report maybe isn't what you want to see, but when you dig into the details, what I'll say is that, looking into some of these drivers of the acceleration, there's reasons that you could probably fade it a little bit. So inflation maybe isn't running as hot as 0.4% month over month on a core basis, but it's probably still running around 0.3. So maybe closer in line to consensus expectations. So the only way we're going to find that out is really to get more data. And that's what the Fed's hoping to see. That's basically what they expressed in their January meeting. They want to get more confidence. Today's report isn't going to do it for them, but maybe the coming reports will.
So let's discuss shelter prices. It constituted about one-third of the CPI weighting, and that played a significant role in the increase. How might this impact consumers and the broader economy?
So the thing about shelter inflation and CPI is that it's really a lagging indicator. So it's not a reflection of kind of what's happening on the market today. And really what's happening on the market today in the rental space is that we are adding a lot of supply. Demand's holding up, but we're adding more supply than demand. So we're not absorbing all the supplies. So in aggregate across the US, and there's regional differences, of course, but in aggregate across the US, what you're actually seeing is that rental prices, rental inflation is starting to moderate and has been for some time. So shelter inflation is really just lagging that. It should eventually show through. I mean, we've been calling for this time and time again. We're waiting for that shoe to drop. It hasn't happened yet. It didn't happen in January, but maybe it will happen later in this year. We do expect it will eventually show up. So I think what it means for the consumer, you have to be a little bit careful interpreting, obviously, the level of rent that people are paying for shelter has moved up significantly since prior to the pandemic. That hasn't changed. But if you're looking for a new rental space today in most markets, most regions of the country, you might be able to get a little bit better deal than you were, say, last year. So I
Mm.
think that's good news for the consumer. Of course, the differences are that if you're in the Northeast, you're really not experiencing that. The Northeast isn't seeing a huge influx of supply like other regions across the US, and you're seeing firmer rent inflation there, asking rent inflation, and also CPI rent inflation.
You are absolutely right about that. I feel that every time I go apartment hunting. But okay, so for energy prices, it decreased by 0.9%, primarily due to a 3.3% drop in gas prices. How does this interplay between different components of the CPI affect the overall economic outlook?
So the decline in energy prices is obviously good news for the consumer. It's a very sticky cost. It's a non-discretionary cost. We all have to kind of pay to fill up our cars, or if you drive to work, or you have to pay your utilities bills, utility bills. So I think the decline is good news. We've been seeing that for some time. I think, broadly speaking, we've made a lot of progress there. It's showing up in the inflation expectations data, which has been very encouraging for the Fed. Inflation expectations have been coming down. A lot of that is probably due to the progress we're seeing on gas prices. So that's good news for the Fed because inflation expectations really anchor overall inflation and help drive inflation on a long run basis back down towards that 2% target.
So, with the annual inflation rate reaching 3.1%, what implications does this hold for the Federal Reserve's target of 2% and the broader economic stability?
So first thing I'll say there is that we have to remember the Fed targets PC inflation, not CPI inflation. So we have to be a little bit careful kind of intermingling the two. So the CPI inflation data matters for PC inflation, but we won't really get the PCE data until the end of the month. We'll have a better read through later this week once we get the PPI data. And PC inflation has been running a lot lower than CPI inflation. So that's actually a lot closer to target, if not at target over, say, the last 6 months. So that's what I'll say there. In terms of what today's report means for the Fed, I think it means exactly what they told us in January. They're not convinced yet. They want to see more confidence. Today's report just adds to that narrative. It doesn't really give them more confidence to move forward, but we think they'll get there. This is just one of 5 reports that they'll have before their June meeting. We're looking for them to start their cutting cycle in June with a 25 basis point cut and continue at a very gradual pace, because they're trying to balance the risk between inflation reaccelerating, which maybe today's report gives them a little bit of worry, a little bit of trepidation, and also balance the risk between unnecessarily slowing the US economy. So that's what they're looking at. They're really a risk manager right now, and they're seeing more balanced risk, but inflation is still really top of mind for the Fed, and today's report won't really accelerate that cutting cycle for them.
Well, Stephen, is there anything else on your radar regarding January CPI report that you believe should be on ours?
Not that I can think of. I mean, broadly speaking, I think we need to be careful. We need to see more data. The Fed's going to probably have the same view. And we should hopefully have by June a better picture of the dynamics playing out. So,
Well, thank you so much for joining me today, Stephen.
no problem. Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely.